Today, what we're going to talk about, and I also want to welcome, they've all come in now, I want to welcome people from around the country who are watching us with Facebook Live and Zoom. And so you've been cued to put up so this is the place where you're supposed to do this. So go ahead and do that. Jason, it's good to have you with us today, buddy. All right. Today we're going to talk about three critical conversations when you are addressing conflict and when you're creating a culture of accountability. So I want to ask you a question. How many of you find it a challenge to have frank, difficult conversations with your peers when there's a conflict, when there's a commitment that hasn't been made, when there's a problem? How many of you find that that's a challenge? Just about the whole room. Why? Talk about your own experience. Why is that so difficult? Why is it such a challenge to have frank, honest discussions that are uncomfortable with other people, either in our families, people in our friendship networks, or people at work? Why is that so difficult? Jump on in here. Yes, ma'am.
Because sometimes we feel like we're being attacked.
Okay.
And it's, you can't, bring people out of here.
Just a second. We doing okay? One of my right-hand people is interrupting everything. Her name is Abby. Well, this is called positive accountability. She turned red and her neck is getting red.
This is out there for everybody.
So you said it feels like you're being attacked.
Right.
Okay. Who else? Yes, sir.
I'm afraid they're going to think I'm attacking them, but I'm trying to improve things.
Yeah.
But we don't have a good enough relationship, I guess.
Excellent. Who else? Yes, Jason.
I have trouble challenging people that I can't afford to lose or that I need.
Yeah. Yeah. If we make them mad, they may leave us. They may get upset with us. Okay. Who else? Yes, sir.
Giving someone feedback that they may not be able to address. Just to explain it a little bit. Yesterday, I had a performance feedback thing open on my computer that I kept minimizing for one of my staff. That he just doesn't seem to get it. And I don't know how to translate that into words or something that he's going to be able to address to fulfill his duties.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Well, if you're talking within a peer group, there might be the self-doubt of, well, gosh, I made mistakes, and now I want to talk to this person about their mistake. There's that self-doubt that comes into play.
Yeah, huge. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Glenn.
Sometimes people don't like to have those conversations because they're afraid of not being liked.
Yeah. Does anybody here ever struggle with that? Okay. Yes, sir.
Like when it's in the peer group, you don't have that like professional setting to like bring it into the business environment. So there's like, you can set a time and a place for the conversation. So like to have the framework and then to have the right time to have the discussion within the peer group, I think is the most difficult.
What's the common theme here? This is hard. It is hard to have frank and honest conversations with peers in times of conflict, disagreement, misunderstanding. And yet, one of the things that we know is that truly world-class teams have a culture where they can talk about anything and everything. We call it getting it from under the table and putting it on the table. You all are very inconspicuous, but this is Jeff Merkus from downtown Green Bay. Good morning, bud. Have you had a cup of coffee? I have. Well, go grab another one if you want to. Okay, you all were just informal here. So, and yet we know that one of the marks of a world-class team is that they have a culture where we call putting under-the-table issues on top of the table. Most teams struggle with under-the-table issues. How would you define an under-the-table issue? How would you define it? How would you describe an under-the-table issue? Scott.
It's one that everybody's thinking about, but they're not talking about.
Yeah. Does that ever happen? You're in a team meeting and there's a subject going on, and you know as soon as the person is talking, your head and your mind goes to why you don't like it, why you don't like the person who's delivering it, why you're uncomfortable with it, why it's never going to work, whatever. And yet, most teams don't have that ability to have those conversations. And because we operate by closure, we have to deal with that information. We will deal with that information, but we're not going to deal with it with an honest conversation right there in the meeting. How will most teams deal with it? They have meetings after the meeting. Do you ever have a team that has meetings after the meeting? Am I the only one here? What do meetings after the meeting do to the problem-solving ability of a team? What do meetings after the meeting what's the impact upon a team's ability to problem solve? Yes, sir.
It weakens it.
Why?
It's adding more drama to it.
You're not a team.
If you know that there is a meeting going to happen after the meeting, and you already know that, are you going to take a risk of putting yourself on the line and speaking your mind right there in the meeting? No, you won't. As a result, the great teams, their meetings are the meeting. Their meetings are the meeting. And people trust that those are the meetings. And if they're not, it's like taking all this energy. You all welcome, Brad. I'm always leaving. So let me give you a visual. Sunlight in a magnifying glass, with a magnifying glass. All that sunlight goes through, it's intensified, and you get white hot light right there on the paper, right? That's the visual that we have of world-class teams. They take all of this energy, all of this thought, all of this talent, all of this capability, and the room that they meet in on a regular basis is the place where all of that energy, all of those ideas come to place. And because people know it's real, that's where they can get honest with each other. And one of the things that we know about great companies is they solve problems better than their competitors. Did you hear that? They solve problems better than their competitors. And by solving problems, it means they have better, deeper, and faster solutions. And that only happens in an environment that you feel safe. That only happens in an environment that you know it's real. And if I speak my mind, we're not going to have someone talking behind my back after the conversation with someone else. Does that make sense? Neil, what are you thinking, bro?
Well, that's how it's transformed me going through this process, is seeing what Fred's talking about. And
Neil's a teacher at Luxembourg Casco.
And in education, we have a lot of meetings after meetings. That's a lot of, that's in any job profession, but we've tried to help change our culture, which I think we've seen, because it has been more accountable, which is where change happens. Yeah. And instead of having meetings after meetings, we're going right to the source, and as Fred calls it, delivering the mail. Yeah. And you just take the message right to them, and it's uncomfortable. And it's not easy, but in the end, it's worth it. And we always talk about the big terms of the process, trust the process. What does that look like? It's ugly sometimes. And Glenn's gone through it too, and we've all had those conversations. And then like Fred's helped me, eye contact and just making sure that, you know, you're standing up for yourself and be proud of who you are and what you're saying to people. But that's the process of what Fred's talking about. And it's going to be uncomfortable. But the trust factor is huge. I think.
Why does that build trust, Neil? You would
What makes it
think,
real?
you would think that, okay, you and I just had a tough conversation. Therefore, the assumption is because we had conflict, because we were uncomfortable with each other, therefore our trust goes down. That's what we think. In reality, what happens?
Builds it up.
It builds it up. Why?
You know exactly what the other one thinks and feels. You know where you stand with that person.
And you know that that person is going to have the courage to be honest with you. And that they're being real with you. Does that make sense? Now, let me give you two premises behind all of this. First of all, leaders are become comfortable with being what? Uncomfortable. This is not easy. We're going to give you a tool in a moment. When you're uncomfortable, how do you work through that moment? Okay? The second is this, that your ability to have these conversations without making it about that person's mama, and your ability to receive these conversations without making it about your mama, is dependent on your ability to be comfortable with who you are. Did you hear that? There's lots of books out. Lencioni has some great books out on crucial conversations and a sequel. But here's the challenge. It's one thing to be teaching you the techniques. And it's one thing to say that you should be doing this. We all know you should be doing this. Would you agree with that? We all know that. The premise is, but here's the challenge. If you are not comfortable with who you are as an individual, and you do not accept yourself, warts and all, you're not going to have those conversations. Because when you're not comfortable with who you are, you find your validation from what other people think about you. And therefore, I can't take a risk of having a conversation with Travis that we're at odds with each other and we need to work it through. I can't take a risk with that because Travis may be upset with me. And therefore, I may be upset with myself. So instead of having that, I'm just going to pretend between Travis and I, everything's okay. And I'm not going to have what is called the 5% conversation. What is the 5% conversation? You know what that is? The 5% conversation is that conversation that you're having with someone and you're dancing around it. And you're getting to it, and just when you really need to be direct, you pull away. And you hope that they'll connect the dots. You ever do that? Gang, how about you? What do you think, Tony? And it's the 5%, gang. That 5% is where the meat is. It's the 5% that really needs to be discussed, but everything inside of us is saying what? Don't do it. Don't do it. And yet it's the great leaders are the ones who will have the 5% conversation. That's what we call impeccable communication. Delivering what is said no matter what. But we're going to talk about how you do that. So when you have a conversation, whether it's with a peer, whether it's someone who reports to you, whether it's a teammate, there's 3 conversations that need to happen. The first conversation is with whom? The first conversation is with yourself. If you do not have the first conversation, the second conversation is not going to go well. The first conversation is the conversation of preparing yourself for the conflict. It is the self-talk that you're giving to yourself so that you don't chicken out in the conversation. You know what I'm talking about? It looks like this. Okay, I'm going to be impeccable. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be direct. I'm scared, but it's okay to be scared. I'm not going to let my fear dominate my behavior right now. I am going to have this conversation. It is that self-talk that you give to yourself prior to the conversation. What's that self-talk do? What's it do? It gives you confidence. What else does it do?
Hold yourself accountable.
It holds you accountable, and it grounds you for the moment, because it allows you to be prepared for the conversation. So the conversation is not reactive. It's what? It's proactive. You are prepared. And so I will say that that is a critical conversation, that you're reminding yourself, look, you need to have the conversation. You can do this. It's uncomfortable. It's okay, but it needs to happen. It's also critical that you remind yourself that I am going to deliver this information under control. Gang, you do not have this conversation if you are ticked off. How many of us have ever had a conversation when we are ticked off, and I could use stronger words at the moment? Someone just said something or made us mad, or we are furious because we learned that someone did something or said something. What happens if we have that conversation right then?
It always goes bad.
It always goes bad. When I was much younger, I played college basketball, and I was slow, and I was not very good. And the one thing that I could do is the only thing I could do was shoot a basketball. And that's what kept me on every team I ever played. And when you shoot a basketball, it's really pretty simple. You square your shoulders and you take your elbow and you make it perpendicular, straight up and down. Now, when you do that, theoretically, the ball can only be missed by one of two ways. What is it? Short or long. But if you take your elbow and you add this, you add two more factors. It's not only short or long, it's now what? Left or right. That's what emotion does in difficult conversations. Emotion adds that many more variables that lower the odds that you're going to have a successful outcome. I've had people say, well, I don't believe that. I've been really angry and it's worked out. Well, a broken clock works at least twice a day, you know? Just because it worked for you doesn't mean that is smart leadership. Because the majority of the time, when you are angry, when you have that conversation, you probably will create what we call, you will deal with the issue, but we call it dropping an atom bomb on a pea shooter sized problem. Oh, you'll deal with it, but what do you have left? You have a crater the size of Montana. And now you've got a bigger problem than you had before. So when you are having the first conversation, do not have the conversation until you are under control. Sometimes under control looks like I need to count to 10. Sometimes getting under control says, would you give me 10 minutes to collect myself? Sometimes it means it takes a week because you're so upset. Does that make sense? But the rule of thumb is you deal with that issue as close to the moment that happens, provided that you are under control. Make sense? So the first conversation is the conversation that you have to have with whom? Yourself. I can do this. I'm going to do it well. I'm uncomfortable, but I'm still going to have the conversation. If the person gets mad at me, it's okay. No one can disrespect me but me. Your self-talk is critical to the outcomes of those conversations. And gang, you show me someone who can't handle these conversations well, and I will show you someone who will not be in a leadership position very long. You with me? This is more critical than your technical expertise. This is more critical than your technical expertise. The second conversation is with whom? The other person. It is a conversation that says, we need to talk. Now, one of the things that we often talk about in our leadership processes is a concept called showing the person what, Glenn?
Back to the book.
The back of the book. Let me explain what that looks like. When someone comes to you and they say, you and I need to talk, what happens emotionally and psychologically in your mind in a split second? What happens? Oh my gosh, I gotta get out of here. What else? What did I do wrong? Am I in trouble? I feel like I'm in the principal's room. Your mind immediately starts going like this. Because remember how I talked about self-belief? The lower your self-belief is, the more you go to a place of this must be a moment of indictment. And so for most people, the very second you start having that conversation, their minds are going crazy. And while their minds are going crazy, trying to figure out how I need to act, how do I need to respond, am I in trouble, what's this about, what's their motive? All of these questions, what are you not doing? You're not listening. You are incapable of receiving the information. And so you all, if you're having that conversation with that person and that person's mind is racing, you're just yakking. You are just yakking because the other person is not receiving the information. And if the other person can't receive the information, there is no problem solving. And there's no resolution and there's no growth. So what do you have to do as a leader in that moment? What is your responsibility with that person, knowing that their mind is racing like crazy? You have to calm them. How do you calm them? Let's talk. How do you calm them?
Start with the positive.
You start with affirmation. Now, showing in the back of the book looks like this. You want them to see that the end of this conversation is going to be productive. The end result of this conversation, you're not going to walk out here feeling you've been beaten with a bat. The end of this conversation is one that we are going to walk out here in a better place than we are right now. Does that make sense? So Neil, let's say I start. I say, Neil, listen, you and I need to have a conversation with you. And the reason I want to have a conversation with you is because I believe in our relationship. I believe in you, and I've been struggling with a couple things, and I just need to share it with you out of respect. And the reason I want to share it out of respect is because I know that our relationship can be even better. And so please know the purpose of my discussion is to have this discussion so that you and I can be in even a better place of trust. Is it okay if I have this? Can I have this discussion with you? Notice what I just did. What did I just do? I asked for permission. Why do you ask for permission?
So that it's an open conversation.
It helps the conversation, but what are you communicating to that person by asking for permission? You're communicating respect. You all, the need that people have in work environments is the need to feel respected. If they feel that this conversation is happening in respect, it will calm them down. Make sense? It's okay to say, I'm having this conversation because I respect you. Neil.
And the other thing I think what Fred does there is, and what I've tried to do as well, is we lay that foundation of what conversations kind of about. It's not, I'm not walking in on pins and needles. I felt comfortable the whole time knowing we have a relationship. I'm walking in thinking we can do this.
Yes.
It wasn't like I need to talk to you. Then the whole time, like 2 hours, I'm thinking, oh my God, what do I do? It just sets people at ease, and your tone of voice, I think, is also key. We all try to do that as well. The tone is great. It's face to face, no emails, no phone calls. So I can see him. I'm not thinking, oh my gosh, what did he mean by that email? And I think that's a key thing.
Do you hear what Neil just said? There's a basic assumption. Great leaders don't have email conversations to solve problems because the email can only deliver 7% of the substance of communication. Only 7%. Isn't it so ironic that email and text and digital dialogue today has become an excuse for lazy leadership? We call it guerrilla warfare communication. You know what? I'm going to be able, because they're not here in the room, I'm going to get bold. And I'm going to deliver the bomb. And I'm going to say what needs to be said, and it's going to land, and I don't have to be there. You'll kill your trust. You do not use email or digital communication to solve relationship issues. It's about the sharing of data and information, no more. A couple weeks ago, my older children were in the back seat, and they suddenly got very quiet. And I couldn't figure out, okay, what's going on? And they were both texting to each other, second row, third row. And they were ticked off at each other. And the way they were communicating is through text, even though they were 3 feet away from each other. Now that sounds silly, but do you see the same thing going on in your work? Gang, let me give you a basic common sense thing. If you're upset with someone or someone's upset with you or there's a problem, get your tail out of your seat and walk over and look at them face to face and have that conversation. Just because you're uncomfortable does not give you the excuse to escape that leadership. Being uncomfortable is not an excuse to escape leadership responsibility. You guys with me? So showing the back of the book is showing the person, I respect you, and I am confident that this conversation is going to result in something good on the back end. That's how you handle it. Make sense? Tony?
I wasn't always a back of the book kind of person, but it's natural for people to jump to conclusions. And I had a conversation with an employee. From my perspective, it was to help them get better. But in their perspective, if I hadn't shown them back the book, she'd be like, I'm going to get fired at the end of this.
Yeah.
And so she just shut down with a normal shutdown. It was such a more productive conversation. And we got to move forward from it. So I can't stress the importance of
That's huge. And you all, listen, if the purpose of your conversation is to let them know how smart you are and how dumb they are, do not have the conversation. If the purpose of the conversation is to show them how right you are and how wrong they are, do not have the conversation. If the purpose of the conversation is to let them know how you have been screwed by them, do not have the conversation. Because now it's win and loss. A great conversation assumes that there is always another side to the story. Did you hear that? Terry?
In the first conversation with yourself, one of the things I always looked at is trying to understand why the other person was doing what they were doing. Yeah. Because if you can try to understand why they're doing it, number one, you won't be upset or trying to just find out. And then when you have the conversation with them, trying to reaffirm with them what their motivation was, why are we doing it that way, and then you can sit down and say, maybe we should think about doing it a different way.
Yes.
But if you don't understand why they're doing it, then you jump to all sorts of the wrong conclusions yourself.
What's this look like? Terry, we've had some discomfort between us, and I don't quite understand it. And I need to understand. I may be missing the point here, and I will own that. But can you help me to understand? I need to understand what is your point of view. I need to understand where you're coming from, so that I can be much more sensitive to where you're coming from. What am I communicating to that person? What am I communicating? I care about you, and that your viewpoint matters to me. And because your viewpoint matters to me, then you go to the next leap. Therefore what? You matter to me. Make sense? That's critical. And look, there's a million ways to skin this cat. And I have people all the time say, Fred, I can't do it like that. Oh my gosh, how did you learn how to do this? Gang, first of all, I've been doing this for a long time. Second, I blow it just like everybody else. And I have to own it and dig myself out of holes too, just like you. But here's the point. You do it within your own style and your own personality. If the mindset, the key is the mindset. If you go into that conversation with the mindset of be kind, be direct, seek to, as Covey would say, seek to understand. You're not here to win the conversation. You're here to understand where the person is coming from. And they will feel respected. That is the key. You guys with me? Now, there's a third conversation. The third conversation is the second conversation that you need to have with the other person a few minutes or hours after that conversation. Now, let me explain. We really try here at Initiative One, we are very committed to practicing what we preach. And when we when we onboard someone new, one of the first things that we do is we sit down with that person and say, look, the environment that we have here is unlike probably any environment that you've ever worked in. We don't have drama here. And the reason why we don't have drama here is we deal with things at the crumb level before they start looking like Thanksgiving dinner. We deal with issues in real time. Real time means you deal with the issue as close to the moment that it occurred, provided that you're under control and that you've gained enough information that you understand all the points of view. You guys with me? And so people, and we tell people, we will address issues here. You just need to understand that. We will do it directly. We will do it with respect. And Abby, and Rachel, when we have that conversation, we have them with you. Your first reaction is what? Wow, that's awesome. I want an environment like that. I just came from a place that it wasn't like that. And you're going, yes. It's a whole different thing the first time someone has that conversation with you. Make sense? And you're not used to it. And what we often find is when you begin to have those conversations, that person will default into their kid mode. And it will look like, well, they'll pull away from you, or they'll start touting, or they'll start getting defensive, or all of a sudden they feel like they've got to walk on eggshells. At that moment is when you need to have the third conversation. And the third conversation looks like this. Fred, I noticed that since we've had the conversation since yesterday, you've been my sense is you've been standoffish with me. And is it because of the conversation that you and I had yesterday? Well, yes. Well, Fred, I need to let you know that remember when you came on, we told you that we will address issues and we'll deal with respect and kindness and direct, but we will address it and it will be uncomfortable until you get used to this culture. Remember that? Yeah, that's what we're talking about. And Fred, I'm noticing that you kind of shut down a bit. And Fred, I want you to know that that's not appropriate. In our culture, we're going to have these discussions without repercussion. And when you pull away, that's a repercussion. Fred, it's not about your mama. And I literally will say to our people, we won't apologize for having difficult conversations. We will have those conversations in respect. And part of being a part of the team is being able to have those conversations with you without you going into a shutdown mode. You with me? You have to have that third conversation, because the first conversation is when you're dealing with your confidence. The second conversation is when you're dealing with the conflict. And the third conversation is when you're protecting the culture. You have to have the third conversation to protect the culture. And what often happens is people get used to the first two conversations, but when they have the conversation and they see the person get upset or they don't deal with it. You've got to have the third conversation because that's the mentoring conversation. That's protecting the culture. That is saying, look, I know you're uncomfortable, but just because you're uncomfortable does not mean this was inappropriate. Did you hear that? Just because the person is uncomfortable does not mean that you have harassed that person. It doesn't mean you've been inappropriate. And that's very important when you're creating a high transparency culture. Just because you're uncomfortable with what I said does not mean I was inappropriate. As long as you're operating within the norms that we've agreed upon of how we receive that information and give it, as long as you're within the norms, I'm okay. And we haven't even had that discussion today, and that's for a whole nother time. But there's a foundation that you have to set with your team that lays the permission to have these conversations, and they're called setting genuine, authentic, real team norms. Okay? So I've given you a lot of information. We have a few minutes left. What's on your mind? What are you thinking? Yes, sir.
Okay, in your culture now that you've established with your team, what's your third conversation when everybody's accepting of the whole conversation? You know what I mean?
It'll look like this. Abby, the other day, I had written a memo, and Abby pushed back on me on that memo. And she came back to me the next day and said, you know, I really felt bad that I challenged you on that memo, and gosh, I really felt bad. And I went, stop, Abby. Thank you that you pushed back on me on that memo. That's exactly what we want. Now, Abby, I was uncomfortable at the moment, but just because I'm uncomfortable does not mean you're inappropriate. So, Abby, thank you. That can also be the third conversation. The third conversation can be affirming that person for doing the right thing, even though you were both uncomfortable. What gets rewarded gets repeated. So when they do that right thing, you got to lift it up in real time. That's the third conversation as well. Does that help? Yes, sir.
Related to the third conversation as well, but you were kind of coming at it as knowing how the second conversation went, but sometimes you might have hit a trigger or something like that in the second conversation. I would normally come in the third conversation as, you know, was there something that offended you? Was there something that I could do better? You know, how did that go? Where do you think we're going now that we've had that second conversation?
Now, that's part of what we call the art of leadership. How do you know? How do you know if a person's been triggered? You don't always know, but what are some telltale signs that you know if a person's been triggered?
These things like always, never.
Yeah, they go into broad generalizations. They get emotional. The reaction does not fit the size of the issue. Have you ever seen that? And so at that moment, that's when you need to say, I need to ask you a question. Did I, in what I just said, did you feel disrespected in any way? Well, yes. And gang, just because you've been respectful, you can't be responsible for how that person receives your information. You can't be, because you don't know their filters. Does that make sense? But what can you be responsible for? For how you deliver the information. That's all you can be responsible for. And even if you deliver that information with respect and that person is all of a sudden defensive, they're giving you information at that moment that they do not feel safe. Whether you made them feel safe legitimately or not doesn't matter. The fact is they don't feel safe. And so are they participating in the moment with you? No. So the way you make them feel safe is to say, I want to ask you a question, and how I just shared the information, did you feel in any way disrespected? Well, yes. Well, I want to say right now, I apologize, because that is not my intent. That was not my intent at all. Gang, is it hard to say that? You bet. It takes a very mature, emotionally secure leader to be able to do that. And yet we're talking about the art of leadership right now. These are the kinds of behaviors that create high trust, high information flow, high transparency, and it creates a dynamic team over time. Terry.
Another part I'll say of the art of that leadership is not all your conversations with people should be something that's going to be difficult for them. Make sure you have a lot of conversations where it's really good stuff.
Oh my gosh, that is powerful. Gang, accountability discussions, those tough conversations that we need to talk about, if that's the only conversations that you ever have, they won't go down well. Accountability, for it to work, has got to be balanced with reward and praise. Accountability to be balanced has got to be balanced with reward and praise. Otherwise, if people will think, well, the only time, you never talk to me about all the times I do something right. You only talk to me about when I screw up. And so I need to know that when you see me winning, that you're going to say, great job. That creates the reservoir that you can have a conversation with that person. Conversely, if they're all praise and recognition and reward, but you never have the tough conversation, that looks insincere. Oh, you tell everybody that too. You've got to have both. Does that make sense? And that is why relationships are so critical today, because in order to see people winning, you've got to be connected with them. You've got to be engaged with them. If they're messing up, you got to be engaged with them. That is why today you cannot be disengaged relationally in order to have praise or accountability. Yes, sir.
Right. Besides using the back of the book in the conversation, is there an easier way to initially go back to the beginning to start it off besides saying, I need you to come to my office or we have to have a talk? That's the hardest part, even coming from me, to have to initiate it because I know they're going to come in or.
Yeah. Does anybody have, do you hear his question? Because as soon as you say, we need to have a talk, are there softer ways to do that? Yes, sir, Glenn.
You die on the sword first.
What's that look like?
So, look, I've been meaning to talk to you about this, and I've been remiss because I've been uncomfortable about how to do this. So I apologize for not bringing it to your attention first.
Did you hear that?
Defense is done.
The way to do that, Glenn is describing that you take your finger and you don't go into that conversation like this. You go into the conversation like what? This. That is fundamentally the issue. If you go in like this, you're saying to the person, it may be my issue. And you're letting that person save face. You with me? Great comment, great question. Anybody else? We've got a couple of minutes. Pete and then Abby.
Fred, for me, it looks like in my head, I have an issue with you. I need to have that self-talk of, do I want to connect with Fred or do I want to have distance? So if I'm fighting with you to connect or distance, and then when I do have that conversation, it's got to be delivered in such a way that although it might hurt, it's not meant to harm. There's a difference between the hurt and the harm. So I deliver it in such a way where we get closer. And we don't,
But no matter what, there's that self-awareness that I'm here to protect this relationship. I'm here to make this relationship better. There's a that's already a commitment. That I'm not here to win. I'm here to create greater understanding. Has this been helpful? Is this relate to the world that you guys live in? Anybody else have any other comments before we bring this to a close? Yes, Joe.
One of the things that was discussed was like the tone of voice and, being calm, but I almost feel like that's part of the first conversation, like checking in with your own emotions of being like, okay, where's my emotional charge for this?
That's right. Joe, I am completely comfortable with you right now. Okay? Gang, if it's between your substance and your body language, what always wins? Your body language. Calm yourself down. Make sure you're open. Make sure you're real. Make sure you're calm. So you all, I want to thank all of you for being with us. We don't give very often, as those of you who are with us often, very many plugs here, because we want this to be all about you. And in that spirit, I want to share with you two opportunities. We, for the first time, we had one of our CEOs that went through our signature leadership process and said, is there any way that some of the CEOs and executives who have been through this process can come together and meet on a regular basis with the principles of Initiative One, that we can go and do a deep dive. We've had 11 CEOs and senior execs who have said, we're only opening it up to 12. And we've got 11 that have already said, I want to do that. If you're interested in that and you want more information, see us and we'll talk to you about it. The other, in 2 weeks, we are starting another what we call a mixed group. A mixed group is where we have different individuals from different organizations who come together to have one large group. And that's the signature process that will meet for 9 deep dive sessions and a year of follow-up. And we have some openings for that. If you are interested, you can participate directly or even Zoom or a combination of. If you're interested in that, Abby, what are you going to be doing after this?
Yep, so we'll be sending out a follow-up email today with some discussion points for you to bring back to your team. The recording, the link to the recording, and then information on the cohorts that Fred's talking about.
Okay.
So keep an eye out.
Not a hard push, not a hard sell. We just want you to be open to the idea.
It's like one of the biggest hidden benefits, in my opinion, of the 9-week class is you can take it again and again.
That's
so
right.
I've taken my first class, and I feel like you learn a lot about yourself, but you maybe can't digest everything going through the second and the third time. You don't pay any extra to go through the other times. So
we always forget that. We have a policy here that if you pay your way the first time, you can go through again and again unlimited times. And if there's room, you're always welcome. And well, man, did you screw up? We have people that have gone through the process 4 times. And they've said every time we go through it, it's completely different every time because you're dealing with different people and I'm in a different place in my life than where I was before. So that's another benefit. Thank you for mentioning that. You all, thank you so much for being here. We're so thrilled that you're here. Feel free to stick around, hang out, have coffee, and welcome. So let's say thank you to you.